such a pleasure to be joining you on this edition of the India Development Debate. I'm Supriya Shrinate, and we're going to put the spotlight on a new term that we've heard, and that's compulsive contrarians. India is caught between a sovereign government and a group of compulsive contrarians who are spreading falsehood, subverting facts and championing the institutional destruction in the garb of opposition politics. That's Finance Minister Arun Jaitley's take on the bitter critics of the Modi government, which will be seeking re-election very soon. In a point-by-point counter-attack on Rahul Gandhi and the Fox, Finance Minister, who's in the United States for medical treatment, narrates how a newly emerged class of compulsive contrarians found the Modi government totally unacceptable, which could do no good. According to Mr. Jaitley, it is the same set of people who are finding faults with every reform move of the government, be it the 10% reservation for the economically weaker section, linking Aadhaar to social security measures, on RBI versus government slugfest, which led to the exit of former Governor Urjit Patel. The Finance Minister says this was disagreement like there have been in the past. There is nothing new in the defense on most topics, including the Rafale scam, but the narrative under the compulsive contrarian gives a all-new dimension to the government as the opposition standoff really heightens. And that's exactly what we are looking to debate right here on the India Development Debate this evening. I couldn't have asked for a more wonderful panel to do this with. Swaminathan Iyer, consulting editor, ET Now; Sanjeev Aga, corporate commentator and former MD, Arya Cellular; Ratan Sharda, writer and political analyst; Madhu Purnimakishwar, columnist and a very senior journalist with her comments; Sadanand Dhume, resident fellow, the American Enterprise Institute. So thank you, each one of you, for joining us. And before I move any further, I think on behalf of all of us at ET Now, and I'm sure on behalf of my panel, I'd like to wish Mr. Jaitley the very best of health for the treatment that he's really seeking in New York. And we do hope he's hale and hearty and resumes work very soon. But on that note, let's really now turn focus to his blog. And Mr. Aga, if I may start with you, Mr. Jaitley is perhaps calling out the compulsive contrarians. Is he right in doing so? Has the Prime Minister and his government really been at the receiving end of quote-unquote compulsive contrarians? People, according to Mr. Jaitley, who find a fault in everything that the Prime Minister does. Has Narendra Modi been vilified in his term in office? Has it really been at the receiving end of the ideological left's ire without perhaps much reason, as the Finance Minister insists?
Supriya, normally Mr. Jaitley is very clear in his thinking and very precise in his language. But I saw the title of the blog, which talks of compulsive contrarians and manufactured logic. But then when I read the rest of the blog, I found that the term contrarian is perhaps not what he's looking for. Contrarian is someone who generally has a predisposition to go against the popular view or the majority view, and often comes up with the contrarian view. Whereas what Mr. Jaitley is really targeting are, what he calls liberal left, and perhaps he hasn't used the term, but maybe the Congress and some journalists or some lawyers. And he believes that they are compulsively programmed to oppose everything that is right with the government. And in doing so, not only do they oppose it, they can extend the truth or even manufacture falsehoods. Now, I would be prepared to accept that there is a degree of accuracy in what he is saying, if he doesn't use the term contrarian, but if he just uses it as opponents. And there is a degree of truth that there are people who are predisposed negatively and who would find fault where none exists, and who would create a degree of a falsehood which is unnecessary. But equally, I must say that the BJP, the party to which Mr. Jaitley belongs, is equally guilty of exactly the same thing. And this is, in a way, the political discourse in India between these two rival parties is very similar. So to some extent, even if what he's saying has an element of truth, he's not the best person to be saying it. And I have a few more points to make, but I'd let you go to your other panelists first.
No, and I will come back to you. And if I can I go across to Swami? If I can, if he's mic'd up, can I go across to Swaminathan? Okay, I can't as yet. Sadan and Dhume, I'll quickly get this point across with you and then go across to both Madhukishwar and Ratan Sharda. First, it was the Lutyens elite, however you call it, followed by the Khan market lobby, and then the blame gate shifted to urban Naxals, and now the ruling dispensation has found a common enemy, a new name, the compulsive contrarians. Now, I can debate the point over and over again with Sanjeev Aga that are they really contrarian or not, but it is largely a stoke to describe people who oppose the government's moves. There is a pattern to this name calling. There's a pattern to identifying these detractors. There seems to be an enemy out there, imagined or otherwise. But is this perhaps also, I just think, the question that I asked Sanjeev Aga, is this also perhaps a reflection of the fact that people have been far too critical of Mr. Modi while in office? People, every action has been scrutinized, every action has been assigned some motive to. Do you believe he's actually pointing out at that more than any other thing?
When you resort to these kinds of labels, it really shows that the BJP is in a kind of defensive crouch. If you have a strong message, you either present your own message or you take on the elements of the other side's argument with which you disagree. But once you sort of get down to this level of labeling, whether you call people Lutyens, cabal, or whatever, essentially this is losing the argument. What you're trying to do is rally people on your own side, and certainly it's effective in that way, but you're not convincing anyone in the middle by simply resorting to name calling. That's the sort of, that's my first point. The second point is that, of course, people have been critical of the Modi government, just as they were critical of the UPA government before. And that is just the nature of politics, and that's the nature of a democracy. People are critical of governments. Some people are critical of governments because they have some kind of allegiance to another party, and that's perfectly okay. Some people are critical of governments because they have an ideological problem with a particular government, and again, that's perfectly okay, regardless of whether the BJP is in power or Congress. And some people are critical of governments simply because the governments have given them reason to criticize through their policies or through their speech or through other mistakes that they've made. And I think that one of the tragedies of the Modi government is that it has failed to develop a thick skin after 5 years. It kind of gets fixated on the fact that it's being criticized rather than simply taking that in its stride as a simple as just part of democracy and moving on.
Okay, fair point. Let me take this across to Madhukishwar. And Madhukishwar, the two questions are, why is the government so thin-skinned? You can criticize, you can be called, there are pot shots that happen. There are motives that will be assigned to you. That is the nature of polity. And why should politicians be thin-skinned? And also the second and the more important point that I think Sadanand made and Mr. Aga referred to, this is happening too close to elections. Many people will see this as a sign of weakness. Many people will see this as a sign of the finance minister glossing over what is an important point in a thriving democracy: dissent, criticism, disagreements. These are important things. You can't brush them under a carpet and just label them and call them compulsive contrarians, can you?
No, I disagree with Dhume, and I think what Arun Jaitley has done in this column is giving concrete examples of simply mindless bashing. It's not being contrarian, or it's not even as if you are picking up issues to criticize BJP or Modi government where it goes wrong. It is in order to weave a false narrative on a whole range of issues. That is the kind of sinister agenda that we have witnessed, not just today, not just close to 2019, but much before even 2014, a whole hate narrative around Modi, trying to prevent him from even getting nominated as a prime ministerial candidate. The kind of hate campaign that was let loose was not just national, mind you. Indian academia, Indian journalists, and all these foreign funded NGOs, and a whole international campaign was launched to even prevent him from getting visas to visit countries that were inviting him. That was unprecedented, targeting a person in that manner. And the sad part is that the Congress party and its allied journalists, media professionals who wish to see it return to power, attack BJP for the very same things that Congress is 1,000 times more guilty of. For example, they attack BJP for being divisive or for bringing about communal polarization. The fact is that during Congress regimes, this country witnessed thousands, not dozens or hundreds, but thousands of communal riots. It propped up Bhindrewala. It attacked, Golden Temple. Hindu-Muslim riots happened all over the country. It was not just 1984 that we remember somehow, but so many cities in UP, in Gujarat, in Hyderabad, so many parts of India routinely witnessed communal riots. Now it's accusing BJP, which has actually not allowed one single riot.
I don't know what you would say to... Yes. Ms. Kishwar, let me come in there. Right, Ms. Kishwar, let me...
But attacking the BJP of things that you are themselves so
Let me come in.
very
I don't think two wrongs make a right. That is the proposition. Yes, absolutely. There may have not been riots, but there have been enough and more cases of lynchings that should have not happened in a government by a party that calls a party with a difference. Anyways, I'm not in a mudslinging match with you here, but let me take this across to Swami. And Swami, you know, the import of that blog, and I agree with some parts of it, I disagree with some. The large import of that blog is that, you know, the so-called compulsive contrarians are acting as a stumbling block in the development agenda, acting as a stumbling block in what the government's real agenda, the growth and a high trajectory growth really is. Do you believe that concern is perhaps warranted, because India is a chaotic democracy, has always been? Swami? I don't know if Swami could hear me. Swami, the finance minister's blog, the large import of that is that the compulsive contrarians are actually a stumbling block in development and growth and the agenda of the government. Do you agree with him? Okay, I think we've lost Swami's feed, but Ratan Sharda, let's go across to you. And, the finance minister talks about the Tukure Tukure gang. He talks about the sloganeering. Now, we can be on two sides of the spectrum on that, but the finance minister has himself admitted that free speech and the right to dissent are critical components of a democracy. But falsehood, subversion and institutional destruction are not, and I think one will agree with that. But the alleged sloganeering that happened, the one that he refers to, the one that he talks about in the JNU campus, asking for the breakup of India, can few angry men and women out there stand, make slogans and divide my country, which is also yours? Is that even possible? I mean, are we giving India far less credit than it deserves?
I am very amused by Mr. Dhume talking about not right to label people. The whole left liberal lobby has been labeling non-left people as non-intellectuals, as trolls whenever they criticize anything. So this kind of labeling is going on for last 70 years in Indian academics and intellectual circles. Secondly, coming to this Desh Ke Tukde, etc., that's what actually contrarian the people who use the sedition case maximum. In 2012, under UPA government in Tamil Nadu, 8,000 people were charged under sedition, 13,500 were charged against aggression against state. Then if you look at you have this film Utpal Dutt charged for 7 months in jail for sedition. There are so many. Sudhir Dhavale was in jail for 43 months for sedition. So now to talk about sedition being removed is rather, funny for me. Coming to the financial part of contrarian view, let us understand Aadhaar card was criticized by Modi earlier on, or BJP maybe, but when they came to power, they realized the power. They utilized the power to plug the leaks and try to correct the financial situation of the poor using Jandan Yojana, etc. And they are criticized. Left lobby goes to the courts, tries to stop Aadhaar card in the name of privacy. I mean, all these people in the social world are already nearly naked on the social world through Facebook and Google, and they talk of this kind of privacy. You have Ayushman Bharat stopped by Chhattisgarh, stopped by Bengal, just because it comes from the Pradhan Mantri Yojana, not even Modi's name. You have bank merger
medical
challenged in
schemes
the
there.
courts.
I'm sorry, no,
now
one
today
second.
Government can't take a
Right.
decision. You
No,
cannot
no.
take a decision. No, just a moment. So you
Huh.
cannot take a decision. You will go to courts. You have NJAC case which was voted unanimously by these people, and then when court rejects it, you make mockery of it. So where is your sane voice if you say it cannot be done in PV Narasimha's how BJP,
No,
Narasimha
one
worked
second.
together and had a wonderful governance of 5 years. It took the government
Yeah.
India out of a rut, and it was the most successful part when we came out of the rut. So we have to understand where to cooperate and when to
You could say that about
oppose.
Mr. Vajpayee's
I
government as
understand
well.
opposing
There was far more
demonetization on many
cooperation.
issues.
Ratan Sharda, give me a minute. Okay, one second. Ratan Sharda, give me a minute. As far as corruption is concerned, and I'm glad you brought this up, I want to take this across to Madhu Kishwar because she's been vocal on this and she's been consistent with her views on this matter, unlike a lot of people who've changed their views every now and then. And Madhu Kishwar, I think the one question that I want you to answer is that last year, you had expressed your disappointment with the government's tackling of corruption cases and scammers, and it even said, and I know you were on record to say that the UPA did a good job of placing DMK leaders behind bars on 2G case. Do you buy the finance minister's argument when he defends the government, saying that Modi Sarkar has struck at the heart of black money and his government has taken its eyes off from tackling corruption? I mean, are you telling me corruption from India has disappeared? Is that what people in this, on this show can actually agree to?
This is, I'd like to answer it in two parts. One, we haven't witnessed the kind of humongous scams that we witnessed during UPA, at least at the top levels, even though at the lower levels, I can say ordinary citizens may not have received the kind of relief they were expecting from, but still subsidies coming directly into the bank account, etc. Lot of changes have happened, but the promise of Modi government that they would haul up all those who looted Indian money and parked it abroad, I would be brought back, has certainly not been honored. They have allowed this issue to be dragged on, even cases that were open and shut cases, such as National Herald scam, has not come to any conclusion. There is a go slow, and I think Mr. Jaitley himself has a lot to answer. Why is it that his own ministry is not fast tracking these cases? And there's chaos. We can't tell. It's one step forward, two steps sideways, one step backward. There's no clarity as far as catching the big scamsters. They should have been by now in jail. We're still talking about them. And there are, cases being filed but going nowhere.
Point, I think some of the cases that you mentioned are sub judice, but I want to move forward, and Sanjeev Aga, I'll come to you and I'll get to the specific cases that Mr. Jaitley does talk about. And let's begin with the Justice Lower case, by going into issues threadbare. Actually, the big picture question is, by going into issues threadbare, whether it is Justice Lower, whether it is the judge's appointment, whether it was the protest by judges or the CBI and the RBI rift with the government, has Mr. Jaitley actually, by laying out these issues in this column and really attacking the compulsive contrarians, has he actually paved the way for a relook or review of these debates? And some of these are very, very contentious issues.
I agree with you, Supriya. In fact, I want to restrict my comments only to the blog, which is the discussion, and not go into the last 20 years or 30 years. I think there is a logical infirmity in the whole article in the blog. What Mr. Jaitley, the theme he is developing is that there are opponents of my party, of my leader, who compulsively oppose whatever we do. And then he lists out 5 big ticket examples. And, there are examples of Judge Loya, there's the example of CBI appointment, of the RBI, of Rafale, most pertinently, and I think one other. Now, there is an old American saying which says that rich men smoke long cigars, but equally, smoking a long cigar does not make you a rich man. So, if he is trying to develop the argument that Mr. Rahul Gandhi or the left or Lutyens Delhi or this cabal oppose Mr. Modi or my government on these counts, and because they oppose, therefore these things are kosher. That does not follow. In my own personal opinion, out of these 5 cases, maybe all that is said is not correct. There may be a lot of exaggeration. But it leaves me as an individual citizen who has vigorously opposed the UPA 5 years ago with a lot of disquiet. In fact, if I go through, you ask anyone on the street, ask anyone knowledgeable, I'm just taking one example, that is it likely that a company like Dassault would voluntarily select Anil Ambani's Reliance Group? You will get 99 out of 100 people will say no if they are sincere to you. So something in this entire 5 episodes, everything is not kosher. And by putting a lid on everything, you are actually giving rise to exaggeration. If everything was transparent or more transparent than it is, we would have a much better idea. But in the absence of transparency, with this determined, at least in the CBI matter, in the Rafale matter, which looks a determined effort to just plug everything, you are actually giving rise to a lot of conjectures, some of which may be false, some of which may be fanciful, but I think equally the government is to blame. If you're going to put a lid on all these things, the people will imagine.
Okay, just give me a minute there, because I want to, you mentioned Rafale, but I want to deal with something far more serious than that right now. And Sadanand Dume, while talking about Justice Loya's death and the controversy around it, the Finance Minister obviously even refers to Justice Chandrachud's judgment. He says Deepak Mishra didn't preside over it. Is this the new normal that we are going to see in Indian politics? And he's not the only politician to do that. The judiciary is being pulled in to settle political scores by politicians across the spectrum. And that is a very, very dangerous precedent.
Yes, Supriya, that's a very good question. I mean, I think that, Mr. Jaitley is a very skilled lawyer himself. And so he led his argument, with perhaps his strongest case. Like you, I had differing reactions to each of those 5 entries. But I did feel that on the Judge Loya case, his position, the position that Jaitley argued, was probably the strongest. And the people who come up with this idea that this was all some grand conspiracy to have him murdered, at least from the evidence I've seen, and I've read many, many articles about this, it just seems a little bit like, stories about Elvis being alive. You really need to kind of have a deeply conspiratorial mindset to believe that he was murdered. So I can understand why Jaitley led with that. To your broader question, I think it is true. I think that Indian politics, both in terms of tactics and in terms of rhetoric, has entered a very dog-eat-dog world. No quarter is given, no quarter is asked for. And the old norms that one could take for granted are essentially breaking down. And I'd say that's true of both parties are responsible for this. But I think that the larger point, one last point that to get back to what Mr. Aga said, the larger point here is that Mr. Jaitley is trying to bundle all criticism or all major criticism under one umbrella. And that simply does not wash, because all of these 5 are not equally, the government's case in each of these 5 is not equally sound. And so it's kind of a little bit too clever by half by trying to put, for example, the treatment of RBI governors, where I think the government has a very, very weak case, in the same bucket as the lawyer issue, where I think their case is in fact quite strong.
Okay. Sadan, give me a minute. I want to take this across to Ratan Sharda. And Mr. Sharda, the one question that a lot of people have doubts in the mind, just because a judgment has been delivered on a particular case, should that be shut? There are a lot of people there, and this is not just of this regime, previous regimes as well. A judgment doesn't mean an open and shut case. People continue to wonder what happened. I mean, look at the Sohrabuddin encounter case. I don't want to take this debate in that direction, but 92 witnesses turning hostile, including the last one. People wonder what is wrong with our, with our judiciary, with our judicial system. And when the finance minister then talks about 4 judges doing a press conference, and he says this was the greatest injustice that could have been done to the judicial system that one could have envisaged, is that a fair allegation at all? There is enough rot that is in the system that perhaps needs to come out. Why should there be best kept secrets about India's judiciary? There is enough rot in the system, let it come out.
How far will you go in clearing the rot? Will you go to the level of Jagmohan Mundra? Will you go to the level of Nehru? Will you go to the level of murder of Ellen Mishra? Where you will go? So when you talk of judiciary, do you think there was no problem with judiciary earlier on? Was judiciary not tamed in 1975-77 when 3 judges superseded, when a Supreme Court Chief Justice became Chief Justice because he told the Indira Gandhi line? Can we close our eyes to that? That sense of committed judiciary came from that time. That's what we're seeing today. You are talking of 4 judges going, was government involved in that? So 4 judges go to the people against a chief justice because he wants to hasten the cases. Then still the government makes the rebellion judge as a chief justice. Was it a mistake by the government? So government has not gone against the judiciary. It is the judiciary game played by the activist by using those judges. You know who led the flock of judges. We can see very clear in the photographs. So let us not get into all that dirt. Look at what happens to Congress. They said Naxalites are the biggest threat to the nation. Then they go ahead and say Naxalites are not a risk. They hang Afzal Guru. Then they said maybe it was a mistake. They have encounter in Batla House. They say maybe a mistake. So how can a party which was part of this anti-terrorist action of this Naxals today is not a threat? They go and support Tukre Tukre gangs. They go and support Naxalites. So this kind of totally compulsive opposition. If I don't want to use contrarian, I am not very good at etymology. So my whole point is that this is definitely an issue and I looked in. You can never open all the cases. There is no issue. You keep opening. Then don't go to Supreme Court. Have a people's
Ratan Sharda.
Have a jury of
no, Ratan Sharda.
People,
okay,
people,
Ratan Sharda. The reason why I asked that question is. Okay, I don't want to get into a tutu meme on this. I think it's a very important, it's a very, very serious matter. And on that, I'm going to ask the same question to Madhu Kishwar. And my only request to this panel is, let's restrict it to the blog. If you go back to Nehru, I will have to trace it back to some other time. Let's not do that. Mr. Nehru is not here to defend himself. I don't think that should be the favorite pastime of people. Let that happen to trolls on Twitter. Let Twitter call names to Nehru and everybody else. Let's not do this on a respectable show like mine. I don't appreciate it. But Madhu Kishwar, the point that Ratan Sharda was making is valid. If you don't have faith in judiciary, don't go to them. You can't be impeaching the Chief Justice one day and then running to them in the dark of the hour. I concede that. But to the larger point of the protest of the judges that Mr. Jaitley eloquently speaks about, these judges say they had no recourse, and which is why they had to go public. I mean, why should Indian judiciary be shrouded in this mystery? Isn't sunlight the best disinfectant? If we can tear apart our politicians and our elected representatives and our bureaucrats, why should judges be sitting in this high pedestal and not be questioned? And why should the rot within the judiciary not be discussed?
We have to be clear who's exposing the rot. Firstly, if citizens claim the right to be able to criticize the judiciary and not be hauled up for contempt of court, that's one thing. And that's much needed relief that the citizens of India require, because this contempt of court provision is very colonial and shuts everybody down, and judges behave as though they are gods on earth. Now, the point here was not judicial rot not being exposed, but Supreme Court judges coming, holding a press conference, calling each other names. That was the issue. There are certain, even if you're a government IS officer or an IPS officer, anywhere in the world there are certain protocols that people in high offices have to observe. And I think it's that which they violated. Now, for example, coming to the judiciary, the Judicial Appointments Commission. This was something in the pipeline for a long time, but the judges, the way the Supreme Court judges have trashed it and become a law unto themselves. They make appointments. Nowhere in the world do, for example, judges appoint other judges or professors recruit other professors. There has to be a due process and an oversight body. They refuse to have it. And look at the kind of decisions they are making. It's not as if they've been above board, and it's not only today. Our institutions, be it RBI, be it CBI, be it the judiciary, they're tottering. Let's not think that all was hunky-dory before Modi came into power, which is what Modi's opponents would like us to believe. This rot needs to be fixed, and my complaint with Modi government is precisely this, that it has not taken determined action to undertake far-reaching administrative reforms, to undertake far-reaching police reforms, judicial reforms. It's buckled under pressure. And Modi seems to think that his very presence is though, and his promise to the nation that he will rid it of corruption, as though that will act as a magic wand. No, it will work. Anti-corruption movement will start to bear fruit only when your institutions are healthy, and the selection process of those who are to head those institutions, those who are to run those institutions, is sound. And with due diligence, people are appointed. And the CBI appointments, it's a disaster, even if nothing else.
Come to CBI in just a bit, Kishwar. I think you're pointing us in a direction where I want to take this discussion. But give me a minute, because I want to talk about Rafale, and I think it was mentioned on this show. Sanjeev Aga, because the finance minister, and you're right, let's stick with this discussion, let's stick with the blog. Mr. Jaitley talks about Rafale and he dedicates an entire paragraph to this. Rafale is the burning issue of the day, and the one allegation where the government, despite its most vocal defense, seems to be floundering. They say something in parliament, then they say something outside, then somebody else comes to defend, then the defense minister gives another figure. There has been a lot of change of discourse, if I may. I am not trying to assuage and, cast any aspersions here. But can the finance minister or the government realistically get away by just calling Rafale, and I'm going to quote him here, a concocted falsehood by the compulsive contrarians? I mean, aren't there important issues that still need to be answered on this matter? Can the Supreme Court judgment be taken into account at all? There's already a review petition. There was a typographical error which seemed to suggest that this, the CAG had seen the report, which it had not. I mean, too much that was happening. Can it all be attributed to just a campaign of falsehood?
No, Supriya, let me confess that in the language that is being used nowadays, I myself would be a contrarian and a cynic. I have long, and this is nothing to do with NDA or Modi or UPA, I have very little faith. Or rather, let me put it this way, I do not have blind faith in any institution of India. And it includes the Supreme Court, it includes the CBI, the CVC, the CAG, the governments, the ministers, the state governments. The question of blind faith, and just because these are senior people, I would also include the private sector, so many regulators. I think that went out of the window many years ago, and I have not seen any kind of about turn. It is just drifting along the same pattern. And I think the effort of any right-minded person, Mr. Jaitley ends his blog by talking of right-minded people with vigorous nationalism. Right-minded people with rigorous nationalism, irrespective of which party, must insist on sunshine being the best disinfectant, and must put relentless pressure. I cannot imagine, for example, the way 2 weeks ago the CBI matter was dealt with by the courts. Just go back 30, 40 years ago, what the American press did with Watergate, something as minor as that in the larger scheme of things. Similarly, Rafale, maybe 90% of it is concocted, but the determination with which a lid is being put on things, what some people call a judicial burial, and it's not just judicial, there are other institutions, there are the ministries, there are it is impossible for me to believe that all this is completely kosher. There is some fire and there is some smoke somewhere. And this has nothing to do, as you may recall, I was extremely critical when the UPA was up to its tricks. And I think we have to get over this, otherwise our country will remain where we are. Every person at this point of time, right-thinking person, needs to be contrarian. If contrarian means insisting upon exposure and upon disclosure.
Okay, just give me a minute right now. I think I'll have to slip into a really quick breather. I'm going to be back in just a minute from here, and we will take this discussion forward. We've just started the discussion, Rafale. Take a quick question there, and we will continue the discussion with many other things. The right nationalists, the CBI, many other issues, and are you going to fault the finance minister for putting out this piece? What is this a sign of before elections, and all of that in a moment from now? And are the contrarians, Is the opposition really nitpicking as far as Mr. Modi's tenure and his reform agenda is concerned? We're back in a moment. Stay right here with us. We will continue the discussion on the development. Good to be back with you once again on the India development debate, and we've decided to put the spotlight on a very, very important issue, and that is the Finance Minister's blog, because it pretty much covers all the big battle and fault lines that exist between the government on one hand and its detractors on the other. Sadanand, let me begin with you, and then I will go to Ms. Kishwar and of course Mr. Sharda. The Finance Minister, while talking about the CBI, says that a few individuals in our investigative agencies had over the last few years become a law unto themselves. Now, one can't possibly deny that, the state of affairs of CBI was very, very wanting. In fact, the state of affairs at any of our investigative agencies is wanting. Things are opaque. People are compromised. And look at the kind of rot that we are seeing with what is happening at the CBI. The reputation, forget about being intact, it has been brought to tatters. Is he fair in blaming the issue of CBI on the opposition? Because Mr. Kharge, who gave a note of dissent on the appointment of the CBI director, the shunted CBI director, Mr. Verma, on grounds of him having no experience, today believes he's the right man for the job and should be retained. Is there a lot of double speak on matters like these? And does that also give you a sense of how politically motivated our investigative agencies themselves are?
I mean, Supriya, obviously, everybody here is playing politics. The trouble with Mr. Jaitley's blog post is that he's trying to sort of, in tone, elevate himself above the politics, but in fact, he's playing politics too. I think all reasonable people can agree that the CBI has been in a shambles well before 2014. It has a terrible record of actually obtaining any kind of convictions in corruption charges, and it has itself been riddled with allegations that its own hands are not clean. Now, so fair enough, this was a problem that existed before 2014. The question now is, has the Modi government improved the situation or made it worse? And I don't think that any reasonable person can say that they have improved the situation. Madhu Kishwar earlier, when we were speaking about the Supreme Court justices, made a very valid point about decorum, norms, and so on, and why that press conference was out of bounds for those reasons. You could add that, and you could say the same thing about the CBI over here. The fact that you have the number one official and the number two official feuding publicly, scheming. I mean, it's alarming. And the fact that this has taken place on Modi's watch, when he came into office with reputation for great administrative efficiency, should worry the BJP, and rightly so. Now, it's one thing to say that these are institutional problems that go back a long time, but that does not mean that they have not perhaps worsened on this government's watch, and it also does not mean that it is some kind of conspiracy or some kind of irresponsible commentary that has pointed this out.
No, I agree with you. But Madhu Kishwar, I'll come to you on the CBI part of this, because there's been so much written and said. I mean, number one and number two fighting. Number one was appointed by the government. Number two was seemingly close to the, to people in power. All of that said and done. And of course, you blame the Congress as well. Mr. Kharge has an issue because he has no experience. Then he's giving a dissent note on his ouster, wants to make matters public. And yes, Mr. Jaitley says that it is the duty of the government to do the cleanup. But has one really happened? The committee's action itself is under a clout. And one, as as a concerted citizen, I think the question that one needs to ask is, can investigative agencies like CBI really be out of the realm of political interference? Or is that too utopian a proposition?
No, it is not utopian, and we better not consider it utopian, because if our police and other investigative agencies can't do their job properly with due diligence in a fair, non-partisan manner, then send them home. Let's just shut them, because otherwise they're a liability on this country. As far as the CBI story is concerned, yes, we know CBI was called a caged parrot by the Supreme Court, no doubt. But to give the Congress party its due credit, They at least knew how to use institutions to implement its agenda, political agenda. The problem with Modi government has been, we've never seen such clumsy appointments for an agency as sensitive and crucial as the CBI. You don't appoint two people at the top of the agency who are out to kill each other and do so publicly. Lot of bureaucrats stab each other in the back, let out secrets about each other, leak to the press, but they do it quietly. Here there is open war, and which means the government did not do due diligence in selection process. If these are officers with such a compromised history and track record, at least one of them or both of them, we don't know, things that one is hearing about them are really worrisome. The least you do is that their sins are A, covered up, they're not so public, and secondly, they don't go after each other. I'm saying that's the least, but I would not be satisfied with the least. Right. We expected Modi. If you want to rid this country of corruption and crime, the first thing you have to do is fix the institutions. And if instead of fixing, you're so clumsy in appointing people to top jobs, then we are really in for trouble, and Modi government
From
itself
CBI, I want to move to RBI, and I can't disagree with you at all on the point that for a powerful institution, it is the will of the government solidly behind it. The political class would want institutions to be undermined. That is what we've seen consistently happen. But Ratan Sharda, I do want to move to the RBI, and let's focus on what was happening there. And the Finance Minister has very eloquently said that there were differences in the past as well, and there are differences that exist. But what happened between Urjit Patel and the government was not just a difference of opinion. He was one of the first RBI governors to resign in the fashion that he did. Yes, there was a resignation that happened before, but this moved beyond the realm of constructive disagreement to what many thought was an absolute breach of RBI's autonomy.
See, first of all, regarding RBI, he was the first one to resign. There are two earlier governors who resigned from the post for disagreeing with the government. In a democratic government, political leadership decides the policies, and others within that framework, within that, they have not been able to handle bureaucrats, no doubt. I think the dependence of this government on to bureaucrats overly has actually hit them. If they had been more strong on political leadership and not allowed bureaucrats to run riot, they would have been much better off. But this trust on bureaucrats, maybe it has not served them well. So the political leadership must own up the responsibility, and if there is a liquidity issue, then RBI must listen, because ultimately RBI is not running in vacuum. It is running an economy, a part of economy, monetary areas under a government which is trying to take the nation to a certain direction. So I don't think there is anything wrong in what happened. It is just that governor thought he rules the country or he rules the whole financial world, which is not true.
Okay, the governor doesn't rule the country or the financial world, and I think he was shown the door in no uncertain terms. But Mr. Aga, do you fault the finance minister for pointing out that certain sectors of the economy need credit and require the support, and squeezing out both would eventually hurt the sector and also hurt growth? Or would you actually point him in another direction, that, sir, demonetization is what really did take a toll, and those sectors didn't really recover from it? Because, the difference between the RBI was on these two accounts. Or do you believe the elected of the government, day of the government, has the right to decide which way, which way liquidity and things should go? If it needs it, if it means NBFCs or MSMEs need a helping hand, then so be it. Because they are the ones who are going to go and face an electorate. An RBI governor will not.
Supriya, you may have a right. But how to use the right is a skill, is a judgment, is something very different. And you can use a right, you can abuse a right, you can misuse a right. I think that's the wrong question to ask. Let me just put it to you differently. I'm not saying that everything that the United States is doing is right or Great Britain is doing is right, but these are relatively more mature and evolved democracies. We are modeled on them. Now look at who is the central bank chief in America, and who is the finance secretary. In the United States, the central bank chief, the central bank governor is arguably as important a position as the Secretary of State, and perhaps more important than the finance secretary. And so is the case in Great Britain. In fact, in Great Britain, they were toying with the idea of getting a foreigner because they believe this is a very, very specialist job where you must get the best man from anywhere in the world. Now, this is the conception. And in the first place, you appoint a person. In the process of appointing a person, I am not trying to cast aspersions, but Mr. Urjit Patel never enjoyed that stature from day one. And then if you take a board which is run by people, Board of Reserve Bank, which hardly has any monetary policy expert, and many of them are businessmen with no understanding, and if you start taking the very facile position that RBI is eventually a part of the government, then you really destroyed, that statement itself destroys what a central bank governor should be. And so once you're sort of programming it for failure, and this has now become a pattern. Of course, I do not disagree. That under the Indian structure, the Reserve Bank governor reports through the finance minister to Parliament. I think that's what broadly the structure is. But in spite of that, there are conventions. And these are very, very senior positions, and they are senior positions, they are specialist positions because the country needs them. And if you don't understand, if you don't have an intellectual appreciation of these things, and if you start going by facile arguments of reporting relationship like in an Indian army at a subordinate level, then you're going to get these kinds of, and these are things which are not easy to fix. Just think of the RBI governors we've had in the past. These are people of stature across the world. Now, if you have that kind of a situation, you have a discussion, you may occasionally disagree. I'm not saying the finance minister does not have a lot of authority, he does not have the power of an elected government, but so is a Reserve Bank governor a very important position. And we can't get into, this kind of discussion that I'm senior to you, so I'll throw my weight around. I think this just sort of poisons the whole atmosphere.
Okay. No, and that is not an intelligent discussion either, but very quickly, and I think I have time for two quick last questions. I will just request the panel to make it very, very brief. I'm really on borrowed time, so to say. Sadanand, the finance minister, says that nations are built by the positive mindset and a national vigor, quote unquote, and I unquote him here. One can't deny that. Yes, it's important to have that positive national vigor, but left liberals are as much a part of the country, as much a part of the economy. Their opinions may differ, but to jump to conclusions that anybody contrarian doesn't have national fervor is doing a lot of disservice to what is a chaotic, argumentative, thriving democracy.
I'd say that people who are critics are often the people who care the most. And I don't think anyone has a right to kind of give other people certificates. People have different ideas on how things should be run. These things are contentious. That's how they should be. But just coming back very quickly to that RBI point, I wanted to disagree with not only the finance minister, but with Mr. Sharda. There's a fundamental misunderstanding over here of what institutions are meant to achieve. The whole point of having an independent central bank is to insulate the central bank, which is an extremely important institution, from the vagaries of day-to-day, week-to-week politics. This is where the government has failed. And so the idea that you should treat the central bank as though, you're it's a lower division clerk, reporting to the upper division clerk or whatever, is actually extremely dangerous, particularly as India's, economy becomes more and more sophisticated and globalized. And so I think that the government out of all of those 5 points, I just want to end by saying that the government's case on the two institutional questions, the CBI and the RBI, were really quite unconvincing for me.
Okay, Madhukesh, for a quick last word to you, and then I'll have to really close this, and I will take this back to the question that I asked Sadanand, and this is about the positive mindset and a national vigor. Does a disagreement mean the national vigor is lacking? Does a disagreement mean do I not have the right to criticize a democratically elected government? Isn't that what democracy is all about?
Oh, yes, definitely. There should be healthy criticism and a daily watch, no doubt. But those who call themselves left liberal in this country are mostly very authoritarian, very intolerant, almost fascist in their mindset. They're the ones who start this branding game. The moment you differ with them, you're at once labeled Hindutva, fascist. I mean, the labels come flying fast and furious. And not only that, your academic career, your media career, wherever you are, you're finished for life if you fall foul of them. I have survived them at great cost to myself. And therefore, I mean, I'm supposed to be left and liberal and lot more, but I know how suffocating that whole world is and how dishonest that whole world is. They don't deserve the label liberal, because if you're liberal, then you examine each issue on merit. You are not a compulsive BJP basher or a compulsive Congress basher. Examine each issue on merit and be relentless in your criticism on facts rather than play partisan politics.
Okay,
To me,
I will come in there, and whether it's the right wing or whether it's the left wing, why can the left and the right not come together and chart out a path for India's democracy to thrive more? But by calling names, by saying nawabs of negativity, by saying compulsive contrarians, are we not closing the doors to the dialogue? And has that not been the hallmark in the last 4 years? It's something that a lot of us will have to ponder over and arrive at solutions. I think a democratically elected government has the mandate of the people. It must decide the course of action. It must decide the agenda. We are all right to criticize the government. Negative criticism is never going to lead us anywhere. Criticism has to be positive. It has to be perhaps even creative in some sense. We'll egg the government in the right direction. But can we shut the doors on any criticism? Can we be thin-skinned is really the big question. But I think ahead of 2019 big high-stake battle, we will see a lot more of that name-calling happening from either of the political sides. And I think that is the bane of our political system. That is the bane of our polity today. If you praise one, you are a libtard. If you oppose one, you're a right-winger and a troll. That's the reality of politics. I wish we did not have to make our peace with it. But thank you very much to this wonderful panel, Sanjeev Aga, Sadanand Dume, Madhu Kishwar, and of course Ratan Sharda, for being with us on this edition of the India Development Debate. We take a quick breather. Up next is Top 10 at 10.